Pamela, you teach on myth, magic, and metaphysics as it relates to a writer's media. What does that entail?
Well, I cover all of the basics anyway. Plot, structure, theme, dialogue, characterization. But I put a mythic depth into it for people and say, did you know that you're doing this mythic theme? And most of us don't, but most writers intuitively are tapping into one of those wonderful old stories. It's what you do as a writer. And we keep telling the same stories over and over again. I like the definition of myth that myths are the stories we tell ourselves to explain the world around us and the world within us. And that's just a perfect explanation of what myth is. So there are variations of mythic themes. The hero's journey certainly is a very good one. And Chris Vogler's done a wonderful job on that. But there are many, many more. So in my work with writers, we identify what mythic theme their story is on and a subplot, and then work with archetypes for their characters and symbolism, and certainly the power of the dark side, which is ever so much fun and can really add a lot of depth to characters. So I infuse my work with writers with the ancient but still very current and fabulously useful tools of mythology, so they can more consciously use all those great old classical story tools.
What are some of the myths that we use a lot of times? The classic Romeo and Juliet type of a scenario? What? I know that's not a myth, but...
Okay, a bit of a range here. Certainly the love stories. And you've got the star-crossed lovers, the search for the soulmate. Another one that I like a lot is Lost Love Rescued. And the myth for that is Orpheus and Eurydice in the Greek mythology. And he was a musician and fabulous, and trees would uproot themselves and rocks would sprout legs to follow him around. He was so good. He married a mortal woman, and on their wedding day she was killed and went down to the underworld. And because, now they'd already found each other. This is not like searching for the soulmate. They were already together. But then fate took them apart. And his grief was so great that it began to drain the color out of the world. So Aphrodite, the goddess of love, went down to Hades, the god of the underworld, and said, oh, give the kids a break. You know, things aren't going too well up here. Let the girl go. And Hades says, not the way it works. She goes, please? So he says, okay, fine. Orpheus can come down and get her out if he doesn't look at her and doesn't speak to her. So in order to rescue his love, he has to go through all these trials to get down into the underworld. And once there, he spots her from a distance, and then he starts playing his music and walking up out of the underworld. She sees him. First she thinks, oh, is he dead? But then he's playing and singing, but he's walking away. And she doesn't know, and this is where a lot of the drama comes in. She doesn't know what's going on. He does, but he can't explain it to her. So she's following him and pleading for recognition. You know, tell me it's you, what's going on, and he can't say anything. They get to the brink, and he steps over it, and she's about to, but he turns and looks at her, and she's still in the underworld. He broke the rules. So she gets zapped back in. And in some of the stories, that's the end of it, and then he goes on to get ripped apart by a whole bunch of other partying women, and it does not go well. But then in other versions of the story, Aphrodite goes back again to Hades and says, oh, please, really? They were this close. And besides, I might want to stay down here and visit with you for a while. So Hades is persuaded, and the lovers are reunited. So you see, working in that myth where someone has to go and rescue someone that has been taken away from them, you've got the tragic ending, you've got the happy ending. The myths are wonderfully flexible. You have a core idea of a story, but then you, the storyteller, get to craft it however you want to, as long as you're staying within and hitting some of those really vital story points.
Pamela, story archetypes and the qualities that these archetypes must possess?
What I work with is a system that is in the deeper and more advanced spiritual teachings, which if you're studying the mystery schools or you get deeper into Buddhism or mystic Christianity or mystic Islam, you find this a group of 5 archepaths. And it's the warrior, the monk or the ascetic, the scientist, the magician, and the lover. These paths are the way that you approach life and how you react to life. And all of the wonderful archetypes that people use, they can come under any of those archepaths. So you can have the mother warrior, the mother lover. You can have the martyr monk, which is pretty typical, somebody on that priestly line. You can have the martyr scientist, someone who's made this wonderful invention and nobody believes them. And they go to great lengths in order to prove what they do. So the archetypes can fall under any of these 5 archepaths. And there are 3 levels for each archepath, just as there are in many initiatory systems, whether it's masonry or a lot of the mystery schools, even our educational system. You've got usually 3 things. You've got grade school, middle school, high school, and then you go on, of course, to your further education. But the first level for the archepaths is that entry level. It's the soldier, it's the nun, it's the student who is going to become the scientist, it's the sorcerer's apprentice. And in love, I think what's so interesting is the first level of the lover is the fan. The person who is alone. They're not with the beloved or the one they want, but it's this yearning towards. And then the second level up is those who have got it pretty much under control. Then you've got the warrior, you've got the priestess, you have the scientist, and you have the magician, and you have someone in a wonderful loving relationship. So there's 2 now in the lovers. Then the third level is where you start to get a bit more abstract. And most of your characters are going to be on those first 2 levels of the archepaths and making their character arcs from one to another or crossing paths. Because at the very highest, you've got the regent in the warrior path. So you've got the empress or the king, that height, and their influence is huge. Whereas at that first level, you're just a soldier. You don't have much influence at all. So it's about going up that scale of influence and how they will affect other characters. And then on the priestly line, you've got high priest, high priestess. In the scientist, you have the philosopher. Yeah, I thought that was interesting when I first learned about that. But it makes sense, someone who studies the world and studies people and studies the cosmos, you've got to be thinking of why and what's it all for and what is our part here. So the scientist who becomes the philosopher then, that's the pinnacle of that particular path. And you see it a lot in, let's say the series Cosmos, whether it was Carl Sagan or the new one with Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? They're philosophizing as well as presenting the science. The magician, of course, it's the Magus, it's Gandalf the White and Saruman on the dark side. And then for the lover, it's the one who has united with spirituality. They may be physically alone again, but they are connected so much to the higher self, the higher spiritual realm. Because all of these are said to be paths towards enlightenment, ultimately. Although a lot of times when you're in the lower aspects of it, you don't know, you're just doing your thing and trying to become, sometimes a better priestess. Sometimes you just want to learn the science to take advantage of things. So you can get dark and light on any of those. But by using those 5 archepaths, then we have character profiles for each of them that give the strengths and the weaknesses, the hopes, the fears, styles of speaking, styles of acting. So you can tweak your dialogue then. If it's along someone on the warrior path, they're going to speak differently. They will say the same thing, but in a different way with different words. So it's a wonderful tool that doesn't get so complex as all the different archetypes. And there's some good work out there and some good books with the archetypes, but I find it's much easier to work with the Archepaths and then plug your archetypes into that if you want. Or there are also archetypes, but they are the Archepaths. And those character profiles then complement the steps up and down. And you've got a really good possibility for drama. You know, with you've got the priest over here and the scientist over here. Well, that conflict's been going on forever. And you know, the lover and the warrior. So it's really a wonderful way to use archetypes in creating story, characters, and dramatic conflict.
Can we talk about giving dark qualities to villains and light qualities to heroes? Do the two ever cross over, and reverse qualities ever?
Oh, one of the things that I think is so dramatic in a story is where you've got somebody who's a little bit more on the dark side and somebody who's more on the light side. And as the story progresses, they cross, and the person who was more villainous becomes redeemed, and the person who started out being all, you know, virtuous then becomes villainous. Now, that's just the broad strokes way to say it, but I think a wonderful example of that is in Batman in The Dark Knight, where you see Batman, who is the good guy, have to do for the sake of saving Gotham, but he has to go into the darkness to teach the people what they need to learn and to help make that next step, because he's been so blocked in what he's trying to do as the good guy. So you see that spectrum in that one character. Now, Heath Ledger's Joker was just one thing bad, all right? But then you have, I think it's Harvey Dent is the character's name, who starts out supposedly doing good things, you know, in politics and great for the city, and then he goes to the dark and back and forth. So watching Batman, The Dark Knight, is a really good study on how the dark in all of us can come out, and then how people who've been, I won't say lost in the dark side, can see light and find redemption. In a lot of stories that are action, adventure, military, you often find the fallen warrior who then redeems themselves at the end. Now, I just saw Snowpiercer, which is an amazing movie. All takes place on a train. And the hero of it is kind of a rough and tumble guy, and he's down with the dregs of society. And then he leads a rebellion and gets to the head of the train and, you know, to save things and change the system. But what we find out is that some time ago, he was so hungry, as a lot of people were down there, he was going to eat this baby because all those people had to turn to cannibalism. And an older man down there said, "No, here, take my arm." And he cut off his arm and gave it to the protagonist so that he wouldn't eat the baby. As the story progresses, the child has grown up to, you know, about 5 years old, and the hero is trying to rescue the child. And his friend who had cut his arm off gets killed in the rebellion. Okay, fast forward to the end of it. In order to save the day and save the child, he has to put his arm into the machinery. So it's that moment of redemption when he does a self-sacrifice that is very much in line with the bad thing that he had done. And I love that symmetry, where someone sacrifices themselves in the same way that they brought about their own fall.
Let's take the reverse, the virtuous one who then falls prey to the dark side.
Yeah.
How do we see that happen?
Oh, in my book, The Power of the Dark Side, I came up with, I think it's about a dozen, what I call the lure of the dark side. And sometimes, let's see, one of them is sleeping with the enemy. You know, sometimes it's just not a good idea to go there, because you start getting drawn more and more into it if you become obsessed with someone who is on the dark side. Another way is the little white lie that can start snowballing, and pretty soon you're doing a huge cover-up. You know, the political saying, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up, that we all get so upset about. Another one is the slippery slope. And you think, oh, just this one time. Nobody will notice, nobody will care, or I'm doing it for my friend or my family. But I'm just going to steal this one thing. And then that slippery slope becomes easier and easier and easier to fall into the darkness. And another one that we see a lot of is drinking the Kool-Aid. And somebody getting caught up in some movement or a political thought system or a fanatic religious thought system, and you quote unquote drink the Kool-Aid and you start believing like they do, and then all of your ethics begin to be eroded by the group's darkness. So many ways for heroes, protagonists, characters who are more on the light to begin to fall prey to the lure of the dark side. And I think that just in real life, that's one of the benefits to people of a lot of religions, because it gives you the chance to confess what you have done and receive grace, receive forgiveness, because all of us have a dark side.
So even the hero has a dark side.
Yes, the hero does have a dark side, and I think what's very good dramatically is to show us what that could be. What is their temptation? Or what is their fear? And then play upon that throughout the course of the story, and they almost fall. Or maybe they do, as in the Snowpiercer character, who actually fell and then has to redeem himself at the end. There's a wonderful speech in Apocalypse Now, which is based on Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's novel. And when Martin Sheen is getting his mission to go kill Marlon Brando, Colonel Kurtz, the general who's giving him the mission says the theme of the story, which is, there is a conflict in every human heart between the light and the dark, between good and evil. And the light does not always win. Sometimes the darkness overcomes what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. Every man has got a breaking point. And you go, oh, yeah, that's brilliant. And so that's what we want to see in our characters. Even we want to know somewhere in the story that they have that moment, that pivot moment, when they could go down that road. And we should see that they are sorely tempted to do so.
Does the villain ever show flashes of light qualities, or is it just a facade if they do?
Well, that's a question that I think can be answered both ways, depending on the character. And I think it depends on why the person is on the dark side. You know, some people are just born bad. It's something like, maybe 1 or 2% of the human population are psychopaths. And a slightly higher percent are sociopaths. They're just born that way. That's the way the brains are wired. And for children, if you don't get empathy wired into the brain by age 5, it's gone. So all of your child soldiers who are made to do horrible things as little kids, it's hard for them to come back to the light because it's just not in there. So part of it is just psychology and physiology. But, I recently did a presentation called The Dark Side of Light. And we looked at comedies and lighter films and what kind of villains you have in those. You know, everything from, the smarmy prince in Shrek to Boris and Natasha, the spies from the old Cold War cartoon series, Rocky and Bullwinkle. And they were evil, but they were so funny. And to the bumbling idiots who bring about darkness and mess things up. So absolutely, the light and the dark mixing together, it's what makes drama. There's a wonderful art term for that, a chiaroscuro, which means that juxtaposition of dark and light. And that's what makes art, and writers are making art. So putting that juxtaposition of dark and light within a character, within a group of characters, or between characters. Does that answer that for you?
It does.
Not
and
quite yet, huh?
It brings up what you had talked about yesterday when I sat in on part of your class about a lot of dark characters have this karma deflector.
Oh,
and then it finally all comes down.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? That's fascinating.
Okay. So it's said in a lot of the magical, mystical, metaphysical lore that those who work on the dark side, you know, the dark magicians as opposed to the white magicians, and think again Lord of the Rings, you know, Gandalf versus Saruman, right? So you think, well, okay, what about karma? You do all these horrible things, you wipe out people, you kill whole planets and worlds. Well, where's the karma there? Where's the retribution? Because we want life to be in balance. Seldom is it, but that's what we'd like. So it's said that the dark magicians are able to deflect their karma. It's like they have a deflector shield around them, and they are protected from the bounce back of what they do. What they can also have is a group of devotees, apostles, followers, fans who take the hit for them. And usually the people don't know that that's what they're doing. But you start working for a dark magician, guess what? Your life starts falling apart. It may not be just what you're doing. You're getting some of his deflected karma. Or, you know, she is directly pointing that shield to you, so it goes off of her and bounces down to the other people. But ultimately there comes a time in the life of a dark magician, in their career through the dark side, that it just doesn't work anymore. And then all that they have been holding back, whether it's aging, you know, someone who's had the youth spell, whether it's rotting from the inside out, whether it's being slain by the tools that you used to slay other people, it eventually comes back. But that karma deflector is a really good story tool.
Can you define the word magician?
Yes. The definition of a magician is someone who sees patterns that others cannot see, and someone who creates patterns where they did not exist before. The magician has that wonderful point of view, perspective, and can grasp what's going on. It would seem almost magical, but a lot of it is perspective and the wisdom, dark wisdom or light wisdom, but to see what's going on, to see patterns, and then to move things around through their words, through their magical spells, through their seductive influence, manipulation of others, to create new patterns. Whether it's going in and corrupting a town, or, in fact, there's a wonderful old film starring Andy Griffith, and it's called A Face in the Crowd. And it's a great example of someone doing just that. This one person going in and corrupting the political system. So A Face in the Crowd with Andy Griffith, great example of what we're talking about here, sort of the dark magician at work in mid-century American politics.
Pamela, what should a screenwriter know about writing about romantic love versus fatal attraction, and do the two ever intersect?
Ooh, good question. The difference between romantic love and a fatal attraction, I think, is easily related to the inner drives, the centers of motivation. And that is when you are driven by lust and then that obsession, that blind drive, that's when you get into the fatal attraction. When you have someone operating from the higher levels of psychology and consciousness, it's more from the heart than it is from the loins. And in our book, Show Me the Love, we talk about transformative chivalric love. And that's the kind of love that makes you a better person, because you're striving to be worthy of the beloved. And the two people are supporting each other, and they only want the best for each other. So that kind of love is romantic love. And then the fatal attraction kind of love is lust and sex and obsession. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And it can make for great drama. But they are distinctly different. In the, well, let's say in the motivation, they're distinctly different in the motivation of the character who is pursuing the love. And in the fatal attraction version, they will do anything and pay any price to get what they want, including kidnapping, imprisoning, killing the rivals, blackmailing, because they want what they want. And it's that physical, lustful connection, which is very, very strong. You know, it's what keeps all the species going, is that sexual drive and sexual attraction. So it's just a natural part of who we are. The trick is not to get stuck down there. And so that then transformative, that chivalric love, is that which is coming from a higher perspective, and it's not so selfish. It is more inclusive and more giving. It's not, you do what I want because I want what I want. It's more like, what shall we do? How shall we improve? And it's very, worshipful and not necessarily chaste, but it's very respectful and caring. But it can also be really great, and you can also have hot sex too. So, but the difference is ultimately what you're after.
The intention.
The intention, absolutely. The intention is what makes the difference. And think of the film Fatal Attraction, where you've got Michael Douglas as the pivot of that triangle, and his wife, Anne Archer, who wears white cotton panties, for goodness sake. But she's devoted to him. She loves him. That's the chivalric, romantic love, because they build a life together. And then Glenn Close, who wears next to nothing black lacy things, is the fatal attraction, lower, obsessive aspect of that sort of thing, the fatal attraction. And you really see dramatically played out in that film how that works and that diversity between the two types of love.
So is that about the chakra levels? You were talking about that yesterday, and you were talking about, the very lowest chakra level is that of lust, is that right?
Actually, the very lowest chakra level is the root chakra, and that's about just sheer survival, staying alive. Whether you're being endangered by natural disaster, war situation, zombies, it's about staying in the physical body, staying alive. The next one up is the sacral center, and that's the one where you've got sex and erotic love as opposed to romantic love, which is higher up. And in my book, Inner Drives, I cover the various chakras and how to build characters using the characteristics of the chakras. And it was fun to do that because I even got into what kind of music, what kind of food, the style of speaking, and it's different depending on, as the old saying from the hippie era went, where are you coming from, man? And it makes a difference, right?
Right.
So the chakras are a very, very effective tool for character development because it's just who we are. They're real. It's physiological, endocrine gland, hormones. And they're all connected, and you've got one thing going more than the other, you're going to be a different person. and act a different way.
In terms of popularity, men versus women, what do audiences tend to like to watch, chakra-wise?
Okay, at the risk of being politically incorrect,
Sure.
and realizing there is an entire spectrum from uber male to ultra female, and most of us are somewhere along the spectrum. Very few people are on either side of it. Personally, my inner child is a 10-year-old boy, so I love the action adventure and the military stuff, warrior stuff. Go out there and conquer worlds and have warrior bonding and do good things and save the innocent. So that's all really good to me. And that's, I think, more of a masculine, has more of a masculine appeal.
And that's lower chakra, sorry.
Well, not necessarily. Yes and no. Okay, let me start. Those kinds of action adventure stories are, yes, in the lower chakras, and it's from the solar plexus, the lower solar plexus, which is about, on down to the, sheer survival, killing and fighting and all of that. And interesting, isn't it, that on battlefields, you usually have lots of rape in war zones, all that below the waist stuff. So yeah, just generally speaking, the masculine mindset is more attracted to the physical activity, because guys are the ones who, for millions of years, were going out hunting down the mammoths and, whereas the women typically were the caretakers, the caregivers, the nurturers. So you find that movies that appeal more to women will have more emotion. And it's more about people connecting with each other and expressing friendship or love, and often sacrificing themselves for, I gave up my career to raise the kids. Although you also get self-sacrifice in the masculine versions too, because you put your life on the line. You throw yourself on the grenade to save the platoon. Now, what's interesting though, you've got that dichotomy. The physical is more for the guys and the emotional is more for the girls. But when you get into the higher centers, there is no gender differentiation.
Interesting. And the higher chakras are?
The higher would be the mental, the throat chakra, which is the home of conscious creativity, writing, finance, architecture, art, music, things where you have to consciously think about what you are doing and you're creating something using your mind. So at the mental level, there's no gender differentiation. Then at the next chakra up, the Ajna center, which a lot of people see as the third eye, that is the one that balances and integrates all the others. So when you've built an Ajna center, you are in control of your lower chakras, you're in control of your physical form, you're in control of your emotions, you're in control of your thoughts, and it all works together as a unit. And you use the various chakras appropriately, because, okay, you're in the Ajna center and that's all well and good, and you've just gone out and given a big speech at the UN and you're helping save the world. And then it's cocktail hour and dinner time, and now it's time to be sacral. Now let's just have some sexy, sensual fun. Sure, but you know what you're doing. And you say, okay, now it's time to light the candles and pour the wine, and let's have fun. But you're not stuck in any particular place. Now, let's say you've got an Ajna built, and you're very good at controlling yourself and controlling other people, and the physical's there, the emotional's there, the mental is there, everything's great. Well, if a person who has a developed Ajna falls into the lower centers, it is bloody dangerous, because they know how to control other people. So then you get your Hitlers and your Idi Amins and your murderous military dictators of all ilk. You get the manipulators, the behind the scenes, House of Cards, okay? The British version. Okay, the American one's okay, but watch the British version, brilliant. And Ian Richardson plays a character who has a developed ajna center and drops into the lower solar plexus about personal power and political machinations. So for the dark side, if you want a really, really good villain, start them out or let us know that they have developed that higher ability to keep everything in balance and to manipulate and have a sense of integrity. They can pull the strings. They're very, very good at that.
What would be the reason in a story that you would have someone who seems that balanced fall?
Well, again, we could go back to the lure of the dark side, but mostly what you'll see when you have a character fall from the ajna down into the darkness is there has been some disappointment or setback. They've had some kind of heartbreak. Something didn't go well. See more at Darth Vader, okay? We see his background and we begin to see, oh yeah, you can kind of understand how that worked. So give your character some big loss. And maybe when they're a child, maybe they lose their dog. Okay, but then they go on to develop their ajna, but then they have another big loss. And that one breaks them. They've already got a weak spot. And then the loss of another close friend or pet just sends them down. And it's also a loss of faith. So whether or not they are religious or spiritual, it's a dark night of the soul from which they do not rise. So you shatter something in their lives, and they just go, what the heck? Why bother? I'm just going to get mine.
Pamela, I find it interesting that, we've entered this new realm where, vampires, zombies, and the fear of witches within certain groups, or that someone has secret powers, has now become very prevalent in a lot of teen movies and fiction. Can you talk about that?
You've heard of the Age of Aquarius? Okay. In the precession of the equinoxes, you've got about 2,156 years per astrological sign. Pisces was the age before this one, and it was all about devotion and idealism. So you see the rise of the major religions in the last 2,000 years, and all the beautiful art and the music that was all based on that idealism. So when you come to the Age of Aquarius, which is coming in now, it's the age of the magician. So in all the old lore, you moved from the Age of Aries, which is back in the classical warrior times, and Aries is the warrior, right? So you had all those stories about the Iliad and the Odyssey and the warrior gods. Then the Age of Pisces was about religion and priestliness and the whole idealized aspects of religion, with of course the dark side in there too, see more at the Crusades and all the bloody wars. It really isn't much of a surprise that we're seeing so many more of these types of stories if you take the perspective that it is the Age of Aquarius, it is the age of the magician, it is the age of spirit into matter. And so many people would say, well, this is just the natural progression of what's going on in the cosmos, certainly on the earthly realm. And many people were predicting it, actually. If you look at some of the metaphysical writings from the turn of the century and even up to the 1950s, turn of the last century, and up to the mid-century, they're always talking about how there's going to be more magic and more magicians come the Age of Aquarius. And that the first 125 years of that shift, because as with anything changing, you've got that phase change, that period where the old isn't gone yet, and the new isn't quite solidified yet. And what do you see today? You see the battle between the old idealism, religion aspects, and the new magician manipulation of matter, and a lot of that science is in there too. But the metaphysicians would explain it as we're in the crossover time. And so a lot of people who are more in the ideal system are going to find this new system a threat. And when you talk about witches, and somebody says, well, why do people, what's the whole thing about thinking somebody's a witch? And often it's either they're jealous or they're afraid. Remember the witch hunts of Europe and America not too many centuries ago. And just like though with any kind of dictatorial system or any kind of oppressive, controlled system, you give people a chance to report on other people, to turn them in, to reveal them as a communist or as an intellectual. You got a lot of people out there with petty little gripes, and they're going to do it. They're going to point the finger, because humans can sometimes be pretty venal and tacky and mean. And so you give people a big target, and they're going to throw everything against it. On the other hand, the fear side, I think most of us fear what we don't understand. That's just human nature. So if somebody seems to be doing something that you don't understand, and you are afraid of that just inherently, then you're going to start pulling together more explanations for it. Couldn't possibly be that she's just smarter. She must have cast a spell to get that job that I wanted. It must be witchcraft. No, not necessarily.
How would someone go from the light side to the dark when they're of a higher mindset and they know better? Mm-hmm. What would be the reason?
There are two really good media examples out right now. Maleficent, right? You've got someone who was lovely and was loved and was loving, and then that was taken away from her. And then she went to the dark side. But she always maintained that line of love between her and the young girl. But the reason that she went bad was because she was denied the expression of her love and her particular desires to be who she wanted to be. So you get a powerful person who gets disappointed, they're going to strike out. And it's not going to be pretty for everybody else. In the TV series Once Upon a Time, the evil witch who's trying to kill Snow White, about 10 or 12 episodes in, we finally find out why she's like she is. It turns out in that story that she was a princess, but she wanted to marry the stable boy. They were madly in love. They were going to run away. And she told Snow White, who was a younger girl, early teens maybe, she said, "Don't tell anybody my secret." And Snow White goes, "Oh, of course I won't." And then the witch's mom, who was very ambitious and wanted to marry her off, of course, to a prince, not to a stable boy, is talking to Snow White about this and saying, "Oh, only want the best for my daughter, and and she really deserves to live in a palace like this for the rest of her life, and have all the things that a queen would get." And so Snow White thinks she is doing a favor, and she tells the mom about the stable boy and the princess who are about to run off and be married. And the mother kills the stable boy right there in front of the princess. Breaks her heart, and needless to say, she has a grudge against Snow White. And when you see it in those terms, you go, well, yeah, I get that. Not that we'd all go to those lengths and to that extreme. But what we're seeing again is someone who is shattered by disappointment, who is shattered by grief, who is shattered by being stopped in the natural progression of their lives.
Pamela, what would you advise someone as the first step in writing a screenplay?
Okay, the first step before the first step is have a brilliant idea. Then, now that's the art part. Then you start doing the craft. And what I always do when I'm working with writers is to identify the mythic theme. What is the story they're telling? And once you identify that theme, then you can look at the plot points that go along with that theme, usually 12 to 20. If you hit 6 of those plot points, whether it's the fatal attraction theme, the stealing fire from heaven theme, the search for the promised land theme, they all have plot points, and you need to hit some of them so that we, your audience, will go, even unconsciously or subconsciously, will go, oh, it's that story. Yeah, I like that one. Okay, let's see how this person tells that story. And here again, it may just be a subconscious thing, but these are the stories that are in our collective unconscious and that we've been telling each other for thousands and thousands of years. So identify your theme. Look into the myth, and on your own or working with someone who does that, or working with a book that outlines it, then pick 6 plot points that you can use in your story, and don't feel like you have to go in order. You can mix things around, but you need to give us that resonance. You need to strike those notes so that we recognize the key that you're playing in. So identify your theme, pick out 6 at least plot points, and then Archepaths. Just use those 5 of the warrior, the monk, the scientist, the magician, and the lover. Makes it so much easier than trying to go through the other many, many archetypes. So identify your main 3 characters. What is their path? And then, do you want them to stay there? Do you want them to grow into the next level, or are they going to be taken down to a lower level and then try to struggle their way back up? Or maybe they're switching from one path to another. That's a lot of dramatic conflict there. Maybe you've got someone on the warrior path who wants to give that up and go be a poet, get on the lover path. And so what are the conflicts there that arise from them shifting their archepath? Another thing to keep in mind is symbolism. And we all use symbols all the time. It's, once again, just who we are. And it's the oldest form of art, right? Look at your cave walls, right? Symbols going on for 70,000 years now. There are 3 levels of symbolism. There's the emotional, personal level. There is the situational or environmental level. And then there is the conceptual level. I like to use the example of Avatar because it has wonderful symbolism. When we first meet Jake, the protagonist, he's in a wheelchair. He's broken. And he just doesn't care. You know, it's like, sure, I'll go off to this moon. Why not? And at the end of it, we see him flying on a dragon, free. So he's gone from this physically crippled, emotionally crippled person in a human body, in a wheelchair, to this gloriously free, heroic character flying in an avatar form. What a transformation. And just those 2 vehicles. In the environmental, situational conflict, the symbolism, there for me is very effective just with some of the fights that they have between the helicopters and the dragons. Okay? So it's symbolic of the meeting of high tech and a more natural culture. And you bring those 2 together, there's always conflict. But just those battles that you have, it's, okay, there it is. Symbolic of everything else that's going on the ground. Then, for the conceptual level of the symbolism in Avatar, you have the trees. And that interconnectedness, it's about we are all one life, we are all one, we are all interdependent upon each other. Whether it's the trees where the families all live, or it's that special, the spirit tree. But the tree gives us that symbol of interconnectedness and on the, in the air and in the earth. So it's a real grounded thing, and it's a wonderful symbol that's so well done in that movie.
Pamela, tips on pitching, whether it be pitch fests or for other avenues?
What you need to do when you're pitching is do what every story needs, and that is to give us someone or something to be sympathetic to, give us some danger, and give us some kind of salvation or resolution. I like to just use the initials SDS. Sympathy, danger, salvation. So in your first sentence, tell us who the character is and why we would want to go on this journey with them. Even if we don't like them, we don't have to like them, but to be sympathetic, to engage with them. So establish the sympathy. Then, what's the danger? What's the problem? Are they fighting the world? Are they fighting fear of heights? Do they want children, but they can't because it's maybe a society that doesn't allow them anymore? Whatever it is, give us the danger. And then give us the salvation or the resolution. Now, so we say, well, it's not salvation because they don't win. Well, that's all right. All the Greek tragedies taught us something. So even if your character doesn't save the day and doesn't win, we still want to know what victory would have looked like, because that makes it all the sadder that they don't make it. So sympathy, danger, salvation.
There was a couple other things too in terms of what emotional parts to have.
Yeah. Another way to look at your story, and I think it's a fun exercise to do with other people's stories and movies, is to look at the 4 E's and think, what proportion of each of these is my story? Entertainment, education, enlightenment, or personal expression. Take, for instance, the Transformers films. Mostly entertainment. Okay, very little education. Maybe a little enlightenment about, doing your best to save the world, and probably quite a bit of personal expression, right, of the director's desire to have things go boom. But mostly it's entertainment. Look at Eat, Pray, Love. Okay, it's kind of entertaining. Educational, not much. Enlightening, possibly, but mostly it was about personal expression. It was, me, look what I did. And, a lot of people really enjoyed it. But it's an example of a story that's very much about personal expression. And most memoirs are. That's why we write them, because we want to express ourselves. But if you want to be sure that in your story, you've also got some entertainment, or who's going to care? And if you can enlighten us a bit, raise up our awareness about something, maybe you've got a cause, or you want to promote a certain perspective on life, cool. And education, documentaries, of course, but also letting us know something about something we did not know. Now, how does that apply to pitching? When you go into pitch and you're telling them what your story is, this is an action-adventure feature film that goes along on a journey with a woman who's looking to save all of the classical tombs from all the tomb raiders that are taking away all of the treasures and hurting the study of archaeology and the culture of the people, okay? But you'd start off with, it's an action-adventure and female heroine who is trying to do something good for, the greater good. Or is it, this is a small film that delves into someone's emotional journey and takes us from grief to joy. Or this is a story that, let's say something about education or enlightenment. This is a story about someone who discovers they are more than they thought they were, and they're able to bring that message to other people and help them rise up as well. So yes, it's entertaining, but it's really inspirational. So just give us a taste of that, and I don't even have to use those same words, but give us a taste of what your movie is going to be about or your TV series. What we want when we're sitting on the other side of the table listening to pitches is we want to be able to tune in really quickly to what it is you're offering us. When you're sitting across the table pitching to someone, what we want to hear from you is what type of story is it that you have? Is it a feature? Is it a TV series? Is it small or is it big? And give us a sense of, once again, that sympathy, danger, salvation. You want us to tune in right away, because if we go, you know what, we're really not doing period pieces, thank you anyway. Do you have something else? You let us know first before you get into taking the time to explain your story. And then 3 minutes in we go, oh, it's a period piece? Oh, I'm so sorry, we can't do those. So it's like striking that opening chord and telling us, giving us a sense of what we're going to be hearing next. And a sense of, is it going to be more entertaining, or is it enlightening and inspirational? Is it educational? You know, think how you would have pitched 12 Years a Slave. Okay? It's not very entertaining, but it's educational about a system that was going on at the time. It's enlightening because of the hope and the people who did help out and try to change the system. And it's personal expression in there too. So you start off that pitch with a totally different tone than you would pitching the next Transformers film. So just let us know that. Let the person you're pitching to get an idea very, very quickly. And most people who teach pitching have some really great ideas. There's a lot of people who have written books. Kathy Fong-Yuneta has a wonderful book about pitching called The Script Selling Game. And it's got wonderful tools in there. She was an exec at Disney and at Paramount for many years and worked with writers and developed stories. And she has some amazingly wonderful workable tips and tools for pitching. I learned a lot from her.
Pamela, if you were going to arm a screenwriter with one tool or weapon for the purposes of screenwriting, what would it be?
For the purposes of screenwriting, what would be a good tool or weapon? Persistence. It's not easy. Everybody thinks it is. You go see a movie and you go, oh, I could have written a better movie than that. You probably could. But it's an engineering skill. Screenwriting, whether it's for the big screen or for TV or for web series, it is engineering. You have to fit within parameters of time often. You have to fit within parameters of production, what you can actually see. Easier now with all the computer-generated imagery. That's great. But you have to persist in learning the craft, and you have to persist in your belief in yourself and your original idea and your ability to keep improving your skills. And you have to persist in the hardest part, I think, which is marketing and getting your work out there. But persistence, 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 never give up, never surrender.
Someone said something great that a lot of narcissists, and this could be a negative spin, but I actually found it enlightening, make it because they have such belief in themselves that all the no's don't really faze them as much.
Very true. Certainly for pitching, I think the most important tool is enthusiasm. But for the actual writing of a screenplay, it's persistence, because you need to, the conventional wisdom is that ask somebody who has had a successful sale what version of the script sold and how many others they've written. It's usually the 10th draft and it's the 5th screenplay that they've written.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you just have to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it and keep at it again. But for pitching, enthusiasm, because it's contagious. And what the people receiving pitches want to know is my audience going to be enthused about this? And if you're enthused about it, then they catch that and you spark off that imagination. Ooh, I think I can start seeing how this could work.
A lot of writers are more introverted and shy and maybe heady. How do they drum up that enthusiasm when they walk in that room and they're probably terrified?
It is difficult, and we do pitching for people who often can't come here because they're out of the country or their job won't let them or whatever. So I know that it's easier to pitch other people's things than it is to pitch your own. I know that because I do both. All writers are introverts, but I think if you can step outside yourself and think of yourself as an audience member and relate the story that you would like to see on screen. I was once pitching for a client, and it's a story I love, and it's just scary. It's a horror thriller. And went in, sat down, and I said, well, my friend can't be here, but I'm pitching his story for him. And it's a horror thriller, and it's a female lead, and this and that. And he's going, yeah. I said, here's how scary this book is. I had to put it in the freezer at night because it was so scary. I couldn't keep it out in my bedroom or in the living room. I stuck it in the freezer. It's that scary. And I even get chills talking about it, right? Well, that level of enthusiasm, think that you're your friend pitching for you, or think that you are an audience member who just saw the movie. What are you going to text and tweet and blog about your film once you see it as somebody else? So just pretend you're somebody else and put on your cloaking device